fashion design is one of those things that was wonderful in school, where you kind of get to sit down and design whatever you want. You make it yourself, you choose the fabrics. You know, you don't worry about whether your buttons cost 10 cents a piece or $1 a piece. You know, you can use whatever fabrics you want. And then sort of the reality of fashion design, at least in a company that size, is that for every hour you spend designing, you probably spend like another 10 hours just dealing with administrative overhead, which is really not what I'm interested in and also not what I'm good at. I'm not terribly organized. So following up on samples and fighting with factories about, you know, things that are an eighth of an inch off was just kind of crushing. And so when I started doing photography, I found that I liked it so much better. It's very like immediate, you have much more control over it. You know, it's sort of more, it's more about the idea of the thing than the, you know, nuts and bolts of putting an actual garment together. But I had some friends who were wedding photographers and looking for second shooters, and you know, I kind of thought it'd be fun to go along as, you know, and help them out just kind of as a way to get more experience with my camera and see the industry. And then I realized that I actually really liked that. It was very, very different than, you know, shooting like very like country club weddings in St. Louis. So I think the very first wedding I shot out in California was this beautiful one in an old barn. The bride was wearing her grandmother's wedding dress from the 1950s, and they were so like fun and just very laid back. Somebody spilled a glass of red wine down the front of her dress. She didn't even panic. She just kind of laughed and said, "Oh, this would happen to me." You know, and we got some white wine and towels and dabbed it up, and you know, she had a great time. And I was like, "Oh, I really like this. Like, I could do this." But kind of the more I got into weddings, the more I realized that was what I actually wanted to be doing. I didn't take any extra classes, but what I did do was work really hard to sort of go out and meet other photographers and do a lot of second shooting for them. And so, you know, which is kind of a good way to get into it. Like at first, you know, you'll do a few jobs where maybe you don't really get paid, but you come along and take pictures, and then, you know, and then as you get better and you start to get more equipment, then you do start getting paid to come. And it's, you know, it's sort of nice. You get to go out and do all the work of it, but you don't have to do any of the actual editing, which is really kind of the biggest time commitment of doing wedding photography. I spent a lot of time online in different photography forums, just sort of looking at work and talking to people about how they work. There's a Flickr group called Starting a Wedding Photography Business, which I think probably was the single biggest resource that I had in trying to build a business. But, you know, I think the real thing about it that was, I think that learning the photography and how to do it well came very quickly to me. It was very easy, it was very fast. Learning to sort of start a business and get all those things in place was a much bigger challenge for me. You know, I think that you go to art school thinking you're going to go into a creative field, and they never really teach you anything about running a business. And for most creative fields, you know, if you go work for somebody else, you're never really going to make that much money. If you really want to be successful, you kind of have to go out on your own. But, you know, I had no idea how to start a business or what kind of insurances I would need or how to get a business license, how to market myself. So those were all things that I sort of had to learn just from spending a lot of time online, talking to people, trying to get contracts in place, you know, things like that. So then I had this really just hellish year where I was working full-time in fashion and then also shooting a lot of weddings on the side. And so I was doing both simultaneously for almost a full year, which was challenging because it was like having two full-time jobs. It meant that I had to kind of put my social life on hold for about a year. You know, my health really wasn't that good because I wasn't sleeping enough. But I think the advantage to doing it that way was that I was able to get my wedding business up and running and, you know, make the kinds of investments that I needed to make while I still had money coming in. So, you know, the money that was coming in from my office, you know, was going to cover my rent and my bills and all that stuff. And then anything left over and everything coming from photography, I was reinvesting into equipment, into building a website, into marketing. I sort of really launched my business on the back of Facebook marketing, which sounds crazy, those little ads on the side that nobody ever clicks on. When people first started telling me it really works, you should try it, I was like, no, you guys are crazy, I would never click on those ads. But I decided to give it a shot anyway because, you know, when you start you think like, oh, I'll just make a website, people find me, it'll be fine. Well, you know, any market is just swamped with a million photographers trying to do that. If you Google San Francisco or Los Angeles wedding photographer, there's hundreds of results. And, when you're just starting out, you're going to be at on page 30. Nobody ever makes it to page 30, unless you're on page 1, forget it. I think that a lot of people, it's one of those, you have to, be spending money to make money kind of things. And, my greatest fear was that I would come out and I would, be hit with unforeseen expenses and I'd run out of advertising money. And as soon as the advertising money goes, then the money coming in goes. And so, finally I got to a point where I felt like I kind of had what I needed, and I was, busy enough that it was no longer practical for me to keep doing both. And, I sat down and looked at my books and realized that I had more photography income on the books than my salary had been, and so I decided it was, time to move on and do it full time. It was pretty scary at first, but, the minute that I quit that day job, all of a sudden I had all this extra time to spend into, working on my website and, redoing my blog and sort of, doing all these things for my business that I hadn't had time to do, answering emails right away. And a lot of the big wedding service sites like The Nod and Wedding Wire and places like that will throw big cocktail parties a few times a year, which is sort of all kinds of wedding vendors, so not just photographers, but it'll also be planners, florists, caterers. I feel like those actually were maybe more useful in an online setting, so it's sort of a place where people can go and say, hi, I've got a bride and, she's looking for a photographer on such and such a date and here's her budget, and if you're free you can sort of respond. I would say do it. But I also would say be very realistic about what it's going to cost to do it. Make sure that you have a plan to have the kind of equipment that you need. Know that things are going to go wrong. You're going to drop $2,500 lenses, and maybe your new $7,000 camera is going to malfunction 4 times in the first month and need a mirror box rebuilt a number of times. Just be realistic and try to have a plan in place. Network with other photographers. I think a lot of people have a tendency to view other photographers as the competition, but really they can be your greatest allies. It's amazing to have somebody that you can share information and techniques with, that you can spend all night talking about this stuff with and is going to understand it, not get bored. And also, as you get more successful, there's going to be a lot of days where you're booked that people want to hire you, and you can send them to your friends who are photographers with similar styles. Same thing's going to happen to them, and you can get some great bookings from them too. So it really, you have to treat them as friends, not enemies.